keynote speaker for tonight, Guy Felicella. Guy has spent 30 years in the repeated cycle of gangs, addiction, treatment, and jail. He spent nearly 20 years residing in the 2-block radius in the downtown east side, and using many resources, including harm reduction, to keep himself alive. Guy is passionate about advocating for the vulnerable people who suffer in addiction and educating communities on harm reduction to eliminate the stigma that exists around it. Currently, Guy works for Vancouver Coastal Health, the Ministry of Mental Health and Addiction, and the BC Centre on Substance Use, and we are grateful to have you here to speak tonight, Guy, so please.
Thanks for having me. Thanks to the Threshold Society for putting on this great event. Obviously, it's a near and dear cause of mine. As a person who'd struggled really his whole life, to be able to be here to advocate for our youth, and not just our youth, but for everyone in society who ever struggles with stigma, discrimination, and racism that continues to exist in our society today. And I often talk about people don't need to be drug-free or sober to access proper services like healthcare, housing. But the reality is that if you're a substance user, the chances are that you won't be able to get these services. And what this does is it drives people into that isolation, and where they start to, withdraw from our society. And then we blame them for withdrawing or not reaching out for help. And so, one of the things that in our society we often reflect on is that our association with who uses substances. And so what isn't reality, or what society views substance use as, and what the truth is that this exists everywhere. And every community can impact anyone at any time. And there isn't a person out there, whether they're young or old, that's struggling, wants to be there. And yet our society ostracizes them and disconnects them. And for me in my life, that was the reality. More people die of illicit drugs than car crashes, homicides, suicides combined. Like, this is unbelievable what's happening in our society. And the sad part is that, we haven't done nearly enough to reduce the harms that are caused by those illicit substances. Sadly, already today, between 5 to 6 people are already gone. That's it. There's no chance at anything. There's no housing. There's no life. This impacts society, communities, their family, their friends, their neighbors. And then we have to pick up the pieces and carry. The biggest thing of where stigma comes from the government. It created it with the laws and policies rooted in racism. And those policies and laws viewed us, the general population, our view of how we're going to view people who use substances. This stigma then drives self-stigma, the stigma that I felt, the shame, the guilt, the sadness, the pain, all driven by structural policies that are in place today. Those same policies that exist in our society, rooted in racism, exist today in our society. I don't blame you or society for how you view substance use. I blame you for not educating yourselves on the root underlying issues of those policies. That's on you. We have to do the work to understand what's behind those policies. High school talks. This question here that I asked the kids, how many of you have been impacted by the overdose crisis? You see the hands? One hand's too many. I had a student come up to me after a high school talk. I say drug users aren't bad people, we just have challenging circumstances. In 2020, the 16-year-old's dad died of a drug overdose. And he said to me, I tell people he died of a brain aneurysm. My dad wasn't a bad person. He loved me. He just had a hard life. And he's gone. That broke me. This is a person who uses drugs. This was me years ago. Pain, trauma, abuse. Looked upon by medical practitioners as a person with a substance use disorder, mental health condition. But looked upon by society as a piece of garbage, a criminal, disposable, put him in jail, punish him. Imagine your only crime was that you were using drugs. That's it. To heal from the pain. Yes, this is a person struggling with pain, but this is not where it started. This is. I grew up in a middle-class home in Richmond, BC, a nice house, money. My father, my mother were well respected in the community. I have one brother, one sister. Everything looked normal from the outside. Inside, there was verbal abuse, physical abuse, alcoholism, gambling, and me trying to figure it out. Developed my anxiety, depression, self-hatred. You ever know what it is to wake up as a child and feel the hatred that you have for yourself because you're a failure? In school, I was called difficult, hard to manage, hyper, put in a cubicle. Why can't you learn like everybody else? Everybody else gets it. I couldn't understand. My best response to people was, I don't know. So I was dumb, shame. Oftentimes I'd come home from school on a weekday, and our bags would be packed and we'd be leaving. We'd come over here. My grandmother lived here. She lived on Blanchard. We stayed at her place. And then what happened after that is that we'd always go back. Things got better for a while, but then they'd get worse again. I navigated around my household knowing where the cracks in the floor were at a very young age. I call it like a soldier with a landmine field. It wasn't a matter of when or if it was going to go off. And so I'm trying to figure things out. I call my family there physically, but emotionally non-existent. I struggled. I had a hard time sleeping at night. I tried to function as a young person, going to school, looking for distractions. There's a difference between happiness and distracting yourself from the sadness. I was trying to distract myself from the sadness. And so I was good at sports. I excelled well. I enjoyed them. Baseball, soccer, hockey. I felt free. I didn't have to worry about what was going on. But unfortunately, with those instances that they only last an hour here, an hour there. And so eventually, I looked for ways and means to cope. And it wasn't getting better. I was getting worse as a person. I started having thoughts of ending my life. I didn't really feel like I needed to belong anymore. I didn't feel good in my skin. And I realized that in my household, things weren't going to change and I was going to have to change them myself. And so I did. I started running away from home. And I kept getting brought back by the police. I would tell the police that I'm going to leave when you drop me off. They would drop me off. There's nowhere for you to go. You're going back home. And then by the time I was 12 years old, I found the greatest thing I ever found in my life. Street drugs. They took it away. It didn't matter what anybody was going to think anymore. I didn't care. It didn't matter what was going to happen in that household. Those street drugs just took it away. the freedom to actually have the ability to function through life. My challenges started there. I wasn't a social drug user. I was that drug user that was trying to numb the pain. I was always the guy that when stuff would stop, I'd want to have this desire inside to keep going. Why are you going home? We can find somewhere else. I can't stop. Who sleeps anymore? Unfortunately, with that, at a young age, things started to happen. Obviously, accessing substances, being on the street. Acceptance is one of the biggest things that our youth need. If you don't get it at home or you don't get it from a community, you will look for it. I found it in a gang lifestyle. These gangs were grooming me, much older. Grooming doesn't mean anything to a person that feels loved and accepted. It didn't matter. Somebody loved me when others didn't. Unfortunately, what happened with that is that it set off a new chain of events. And by the time that happened, police involvement, gang squad, by the time I was 14 years old, I was incarcerated for 1 year in the juvenile detention system. At the same time, my mom came to court and she made me a ward of the court, saying that all the issues that were happening in the household was due to the issues that I was just uncontrollable. Can you imagine being 14 years old and you find this out? I don't understand what ward of the court meant, but I remember the probation officer saying to me, it means you won't go back home. But tell that to a 14-year-old that they're not going to go back home. I still had a brother, I still had a sister. And as sad as it seems, even though you're in a dysfunctional familyhood, it was comforting. Strange way, because I knew what to expect. I knew how to navigate through that. While I was incarcerated, released, the drugs got harder, heavier. I was bounced around from group home to group home, school system to school system. The same unpredictable lifestyle at my home life was now the reality of my juvenile life, being moved around. Imagine that you get used to a place and comfortable, and then they move you to another place. Then you have to I had to figure out how you were as people, how you were going to treat me. And imagine that instability in a young person's lives who doesn't know how to cope. Undiagnosed learning disabilities didn't come until I was 37 years old. I felt the shame. I was dumb. I carried that my whole life. I started running away from those group homes. I started venturing into the downtown east side of Vancouver at a very young age. And in there, I found comfort. I found the beauty of knowing that other people were going through something that I was going through. Similar circumstances were different, but I could see the pain. I could relate to that. It's comforting to know that you're not alone, even if you're surrounded by people struggling with pain. And so we leaned on each other because nobody else cared. And as a youth in the downtown east side, it was very intimidating for me to sleep down there. So where I slept was in the Dunbar area, which is a very nice area of Vancouver, like very nice. But I used to sleep behind the Dunbar Community Center. And in the morning, I'd wake up and I'd go inside to their facilities and take a shower and then go back into the downtown east side. And then I started to understand how the street life works. And the drugs got faster and harder. I met some people. People were teaching me how the street worked. I was a survivor. And sadly, the beginning stages of my life, that survival that I had to learn as a child was going to be Nothing compared to the biggest battle of my life. And so in the downtown east side, eventually I just never went back to Dunbar. I never left. And from 1983 to 1993, I was in and out of the downtown east side of Vancouver. And from 1993 to 2013, I never left the downtown east side of Vancouver. You could find me on the corner of Hastings and Columbia or Hastings and Main. That's where I was, trying to figure it out. Pain. This is a person struggling with pain. Unaddressed pain piled on by trauma of a system. This is as bad as it got. I survived the first dueling public health emergency in British Columbia, which was the HIV/AIDS crisis and the overdose crisis, where 1 in 4 contracted HIV/AIDS in the downtown east side. I watched friends die from AIDS. I watched friends die from drug overdoses. We never did anything for the drug overdoses that happened in the 90s. I see the same eerie, familiar circumstances with the COVID-19 crisis and the drug overdoses crisis we're in. All the resources went into AIDS. All the resources went into COVID while substance users died. I survived decades of being homeless. I survived 5 osteomyelitis bone infections, 4 in my left leg, 1 in my back, where I had to relearn how to walk again. Pain. The struggle inside to live. Booth 5, February 18th, 2013, at the supervised consumption site. The last time I overdosed. I woke up on the ground between 7 to 10 minutes. It took to bring me back. It was one of the longest overdoses at that facility at that particular time. And that's when fentanyl started to hit the streets in 2012, and I was actively purchasing it. When I woke up, I looked over and the nurse was crying. And I asked her, "Why are you crying?" And she said, "Because I care, Guy." And I just started to cry. I told her, I don't want to do this anymore. Physically, mentally, I was slower. My speech was slurred. Did it go too far? I remember that I actually have to think to put my foot in front of the other to walk. On compassionate grounds, they took me up to the 2nd floor, which is the detox facility. Because they knew that if they let me go, that I wouldn't be back in the morning. And I stayed there and they monitored me and the journey began. This is how harm reduction and recovery work together in my life. It's a relay race. You know, the baton passing on the same team with the same objective in mind, to help people, to support people. You know, oftentimes we pit one against the other. Gone are the days where it's and or it's both. I don't support harm reduction over recovery, and I don't support recovery over harm reduction. I support people. There's a difference. I don't get that confused. You meet people where they're at, you support them, you give them all the options. It's their journey. I'm just the taxi driver. That's all we are. We're a bunch of cab drivers to help people. And if harm reduction didn't exist, then I wouldn't exist. These kids wouldn't exist. These families wouldn't exist. This is not just a one-off. The gratitude that I have for harm reduction for allowing me to be a dad today wouldn't have happened. All these children came after, not before. They came after. And I'll tell you something that we all have as people, that something is often more powerful than you ever think it is, often overlooked, often not thought about, was what changed the direction of my life? It was human connection. That changes the direction of our lives, to be accepted for who we are as people, to be loved, not judged, not punished, to be welcomed. I describe supervised consumption sites as basically the theme song of Cheers when I walked in the door. I might have been Norm. Everybody knew my name. It was a welcoming environment that bridged the gap for me to access other services. And when I got to a spot in my life where the drugs didn't work, because the drugs worked for so long in my life until they didn't, the same drugs that saved my life were now the same drugs trying to end it. And I saw it. I was diagnosed with ADD. I cried. I shared with the specialist that I just thought I was stupid. She said, "Oh, Guy, no. You've had to live your whole life with not knowing. Awareness of who I was as a person, the trauma that I had buried." I was sharing with Bernie over dinner. Does the pain or the trauma ever go away? Does the anxiety or the depression ever go away? But we learn how to cope. I started to understand my relationship with those drugs. And then I didn't need them anymore. That took 31 years, not 3 months. That took a lifetime of learning about who I am as a person. Yet everybody wants results. You want to know what the results are? Don't celebrate the outcome. Celebrate trying. When you celebrate trying, people are motivated to keep trying. We're all trying in this world. I'll share with you probably one of the most powerful stories of human connection that I could ever share with anybody. It's my grandmother, who lived out here. She loved me. She knew all the stuff that I was going through. And when I started to venture into the downtown east side, it really limited my contact with her. But every year, twice a year, she got on a Greyhound bus onto the ferry, came to the downtown east side and found me, usually around my birthday or around Christmas. And she'd take me out to eat, and she'd give me a card with some money. She never judged me or told me that I needed to do this or I needed to do that. Do you know what she always said? "I keep telling them you're going to figure it out. They think I'm crazy." "You're going to figure it out, Guy." She loved me. That's what she did. And as time passed and she got sicker and she couldn't always come by to see me, she would send a card to the supervised injection site with money in it. Who sends money in the mail anymore? She did. Old school. And I'd open the letter and I'd cry. Moments of hope. Thinking about you. Love you. Happy birthday. Merry Christmas. Twice a year. Without failure. In 2013, when I left the downtown east side of Vancouver and I met my wife, in November of that year, she became pregnant with our first child. And at the same time, my grandmother was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and she was moved into palliative care, and she was given 2 weeks to live. Obviously, the early stages of pregnancy you don't announce publicly, but we thought, well, she's going to go in 2 weeks. We'll tell her. I walked into that palliative care room, and boy, what an emotional conversation that was. The tears. She was over the moon. And then she said this, I can't wait to meet my great-grandchild. And I just kind of looked at her and I was like, that's not possible. I'm not good at math, Grandma, but you got like 2 weeks to live. And it's 9 months away. It's not like happening next week. And she squeezed my hand and she said, no, I'm going to stay. And I just was kind of like, okay, well, you stay. And so daily, my wife and I, we showed up at palliative care, 7 p.m. for her 2 favorite shows, Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy, Black Starbucks coffee, and highly competitive game. And a month had passed. And I remember the nurses were coming up to us and, the cancer was spreading. They were saying to me that, she's a fighter. I said, I know about fighting. And 3 months had passed. And you see the pain, the will, somebody trying to will themselves. We found out it was a boy. We got the ultrasound. 4 months now. We raced back. We named him Noah. She was holding the ultrasound like she was holding him. And she loved the name. She says, it's a strong name, Guy. And the emotional roller coaster ride of watching somebody, different dynamics of the day, how she was going to feel, if the call was going to come. 9 months later, we wheeled her out of palliative care, and she held her great-grandchild, Noah, for the first and only time. The will, the human nature to live against all odds is in all of us, even the people that we see out there. What my grandmother had taught me was just how powerful human connection is to people. By showing up, by sending a card, by letting me know how much I meant to her. The moments of hope. My grandmother showed me I was just repaying it forward by showing up at 7 o'clock. I didn't understand that. She taught me that. A couple days later, I came back to see her and I could see the impacts of cancer and the toll that it had taken on her, the pain that she was in. I said, I'm not coming back anymore. I don't want to see this anymore. And she said, I had to stay. I had to make sure that you were going to be okay. I had to witness the miracle. Noah, that's not supposed to happen. I just told her, you let go. And thanks for always being there. I'll never forget you. And then a short time later, we'd gotten the call that she had passed. I've never forgotten her compassion, non-judgmental attitude. She loved me. And she taught me how to love back. She taught me how I was worth it. Imagine if we can do that for many others. People are worth it. Whether they use drugs or not, they're people. Where's our humanity? This is some of my social media handles where I post stuff. One of the biggest things that changed my life was trauma therapy and being able to access it. The awareness of the diagnosis. the awareness that I was using substances because I was trying to numb the pain, because the pain was unbearable. You can understand when you see people behind the story. You have to understand the story of the person. And when you do, you understand why they would use the way they use. I often reflect this too to people. I've been to treatment many times. I was often associated with a failure because I couldn't complete treatment. But nobody thought of celebrating that trying incident. I just kept getting back up. I kept getting knocked down. I kept getting back up. In our society, we treat people who are off drugs better than we treat people who are using them. That's a shame. That's the same person. The beauty of people. This doorway. This is the doorway that I used to sleep in the downtown east side. It's right across from the West Hotel. It's on Carroll Street. This is my spot. I slept there 9 years ago last Christmas. I was in that doorway sleeping. Cold. Christmas Day. Some random lady rolled up, woke me up, gave me a coffee, $50, and had to kneel down and give me a hug and say Merry Christmas. And she got up and she walked away. I've never seen her again, but I've never, ever forgotten what she did. And I have so many questions for her. Was that your coffee? Or did you see me and then go buy a coffee and come back? What if I was gone? What motivated you to give me $50? Most people just would walk by. What stopped you? Did you have somebody in your family that struggled? I don't know. But all I know is this, is that people will never forget how you made them feel. They'll never forget that. You only get one shot. And remember this when you're dealing with anybody struggling. If they come to your service to ask for help, it's not just you and them. It's you, them, and every traumatic experience that they've ever gone through in their life, and show a little bit of kindness to that person and understand that they have been traumatized by systems in place that have existed far too long in our society, and we as people have to change that, demand that to change, demand any government that's in power to change it, to treat people like people. 10 years ago, I was on Vancouver Police Department's most wanted list. Well, guess what? 2020, I was Vancouver Magazine's top power 50 list of influential people. People change when they're supported. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Guy, for the gift of your story today. And I'm just, I know I'll speak for many when I just say grateful for your voice and your impact and your life. Thank you for being here tonight with us. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do now. I'm going to pass it over to my friend David, who's